episode number 95. You can get all the show notes and resources at dadhackers.us/095. What's up, Dad Hackers? My name is Patrick Antonucci, and I am the host and founder of this podcast and community of Dad Hackers. Dad Hackers is a community of Christian fathers who are devoted to encouraging, equipping, and enabling one another to become the men that God has created and called us to be, so that we can raise up the next generation of fully devoted followers of Christ and leave a legacy of multi-generational faithfulness. Now, on this show, we primarily interview Christian men to dive deep into their experiences and insights into what it means to be a Christian man, a Christian husband, a Christian father, and a Christian leader. We ask questions that dig deep into the thinking and rationale and experiences of these men so that we can all learn and grow into the men that God is calling us to be. I'm so thankful that you've joined us today. Make sure you subscribe so that you never miss any of our value-packed episodes. Also, please make sure you leave an honest review if you're listening to this in iTunes or any other platform that takes reviews. Reviews boost the show's ratings, which means that more dads are going to come across our show and benefit from the content that we put out. I also wanted to let you know that we do have a free private Facebook group just for Christian dads. So after the show, make sure you hop on over to the show notes. There's a link for that in there as well. What's going on, Dad Hackers? Wanted to talk to you tonight about 7 financial habits every man must establish. I had this on my heart to talk about this tonight, and we had our Ironman meeting this evening, and the gentleman that was in the spotlight tonight, he brought up the question about finances and budgeting, and I just was like, man, that's awesome, because that was my plan, was to talk about that stuff tonight as I do this live video, and we ended up talking about it in our Ironman group, and it's just so cool how God kind of worked that together. So before I jump into the 7 financial habits that every man must establish, I wanted to establish first a baseline for why I'm doing this biblically. Proverbs 13:16 says, "A wise man thinks ahead, but a fool doesn't." I know a lot of guys plan in their mind about their finances. Some of them don't think about it at all. Sometimes the wife handles all the finances, and there's nothing wrong with that. But if you don't have a plan and you're not thinking ahead, you're not going to be intentional with your finances, and you're not going to be a good steward, and you're not going to be able to enjoy the blessings that come along with having a handle on your finances. Proverbs 24, verse 27, the proverb says, "Prepare your work outside and make it ready for yourself in the field. Afterwards, then build your house." What on earth does that have to do with finances? Well, I think what the proverb writer is trying to communicate there is that there is an order to doing things. And when you have a plan, you should follow a logical process. You should follow logical steps for laying out a framework for how to establish habits with your finances. And so I want to kind of go through some of these things with you tonight and kind of go in a logical order, financially speaking. And I know that guys are all over the place with their finances on a scale of 1 to 10. Some of you are at a 1, some of you are at a 5, some of you are at a 7, some of you are at a 9. Very, very few of you probably are at 10. I'm thinking most of you on a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is you're completely financially destitute, 10 is you are on a trajectory for financial success. You may not be a millionaire. You may not be rolling in it. You may not have everything you want financially, but a 10 is you're on that path and you have a plan. My guess is that most of you would label yourself in that 5 to 7 range with respect to how you rate yourself with your finances. And that's who I'm speaking to tonight. Yes, this is going to apply and help people that are below a 5. Yes, this is going to help people that are above a 7. But the majority of men that I speak to about their finances are in that 5 to 7 range. So first and foremost is giving. Proverbs 3:9 says, "Honor the Lord from your wealth, from the first of all your produce." and your barns will be filled with plenty, and your vats with new wine. God has created things in such a manner that it is more blessed to give than to receive. Paul quotes Christ, and he says, Christ said, it is more blessed to give than to receive. And our culture has so ingrained in our minds that it's better to receive than to give, that this is very difficult for a lot of us to get into our heads. But it is more blessed to give than to receive. It's not that God needs your money. He is all powerful, all consuming, all knowledgeable, and he's everywhere. He does not need your money. But when you give to him, when you give to his work, and when you give to his people, you are being like God, because God is a giving, a generous, a gracious, a lavish God who likes to give to his people. He loves to give to his children. And if we're going to be more and more and more like God, then we need to be giving more and more and more to other people. So the question is, do you have a plan for giving? Do you have it set up in your budget, in your finances, how to give, what to give, when to give, who you're going to give to, how you're going to give it? Some things to think about with respect to giving. Proverbs chapter 27, verse 23. I'm going to go through a lot of Proverbs tonight. There's so much wisdom in that book. But Proverbs 27, 23 says, be diligent to know the state of your flocks and attend to your herds. Now, again, most of us, that doesn't apply. We don't have flocks. We don't have herds. We don't have fields. We're not farmers. We're not shepherds or anything like that, literally. But the idea is that the man in that position knew what was going on with his assets. And this leads me to the second and the third habit. The second habit is budgeting. You should have a detailed budget, a written plan, whether it's on a spreadsheet, whether you're using an app, or whether you go old school and grab out the yellow pad or the notebook and write it down. You should have a detailed budget laid out each month. And what this budget should include is it should include all the income you're going to receive. Are you getting a paycheck? Are you getting tips? Are you getting any gifts? What kind of income are you receiving from different jobs? Does your wife receive some income? I don't know. Any money that is coming into your home, we're not talking investments that for retirement and those things, but any type of income that is coming into your home, you need to have that as part of your budget. If you are a business owner or an entrepreneur and you are paying yourself, you of course don't use all the profit or all the income from your business. You allocate whatever you allocate as your take-home pay, and that is your income. Your income should be part of your budget. You should know exactly how much is coming into your home on a weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly basis, depending on however you get paid. Now, those of you that are in sales or commission, this is a little bit more tricky because you don't always have a consistent income coming in every month. So you're going to have to be a little bit more diligent in how you plan for things. But you do know every month you're going to have some income. And for those of you that are in sales or commission, one of the things you might want to try working toward is living a month behind. So what I mean by that is last month's pay you're using for this month's expenses, so that this month's commission, which you don't know what it is yet, you're building that up and you're going to use that next month. So that the commission that you make in January, you're going to be creating February's budget from that. Just an idea. I've never actually had to live off of straight commission, so I don't have personal experience with how it is. If I did, that's what I would probably try first. It's going to be hard if you're not in that, but that's just an idea that I have. But anyway, on your budget, you should have your income. You should have all of your expenses that you know are going to be reoccurring every month: your electric bill, your gas bill, your mortgage, those kind of things. Monthly dues that you have. Maybe it's an Amazon subscription. Maybe it's a Netflix. I don't know. Whatever you have. And that should be in part in your budget as well. And then you should have categories allocated for certain expenses that are going to come up every month that you know are coming up every month. For example, food and groceries comes up every month. How much do you know how much your family is spending each month on groceries? A lot of guys have no clue. No clue whatsoever. Is it $100? I don't know. Is it $1,000? No clue. I don't know. Well, you should have in your budget laid out how much you anticipate spending on food. Also, gas for your vehicles. That's a big one. Miscellaneous expenses, things that come up every month that you didn't anticipate, or just, if you want to go grab a coffee with your wife. Well, if you do, that's fine if you want to spontaneously have that. But it's going to be better if you have allocated $100 a month or whatever, $150, $10, whatever your budget will allow, if you've allocated that before the month starts, so that you know that, okay, we have $10 this month that we can spend on going to grab a cup of coffee together, instead of just willy-nilly grabbing coffee whenever. And then at the end of the month, you look back and, oh, we spent $54 at Starbucks. That's pretty crazy. We could have used that money for some other things. So those are some things that should be in your monthly budget, as well as things that you're saving for. You might think of long-term retirement or short-term expenditures that you know are coming up. One of those things that's real big, and I made a post about this a couple weeks ago, is now is the time to be setting aside money for Christmas, because you know it's coming, December 25th, every year. Most people don't think about spending money on Christmas until after Thanksgiving. The best time to begin thinking about spending money on Christmas is right after Christmas. So for the next year is what I'm talking about. So if you're putting away $50 each month for Christmas, when Christmas rolls around, you now have $600 instead of this pop-up expense, instead of using credit cards. And then February comes and these credit cards are now due, and now you are in quite a pickle. So the second tip I have, or the second financial habit you need to establish, is budgeting. Have a detailed budget every month. And after you do this for a couple months and you track it and you tweak it and you fine tune it, you can really begin to make some progress financially speaking. Third habit that you need to develop and establish is tracking your spending. Most people have no idea how much they are actually spending and what they're spending it on. I challenge you to look back over your bank statements for the past 2 months and just see where all of your money is going. And you're probably going to be very surprised at how much you spent in the month of December on Christmas if you didn't track it, if you didn't already have a plan for it. So tracking your spending is very big. What I counsel men to do when I'm helping them get a grip on their finances is I challenge them to one, write down every single penny for a week that is spent in your household that comes out of your budget. Okay. So anything you spend, anything your wife spends, any money your children spend that you've given to them. They ask, hey, Dad, can I have $10 to go do this? Track it, write it down, save your receipts. This can be tricky, but it's a very valuable exercise, because now you have objective evidence for what you are actually spending in a given week or a given month. You see, lots of times men make the mistake of thinking they can keep track of it all in their head, and you kind of get a rough idea of how much you're spending and what it's all being spent on. But let me tell you, you have no clue if it's all in your head. If you can't provide objective evidence, and what I mean by that is you look at your bank statements, you look at your receipts, and you track it. Get an Excel spreadsheet, use a Google Sheet, whatever you need to use. I use Google Sheets for tracking my expenses. You can't just look at bank statements though, because my guess is a lot of you still use cash. Totally cool. I use cash. I have cash in my wallet. But what happens is those expenses get lost. They fall through the cracks because you spend cash, you don't keep the receipt, then you have no idea where that 5, 10, 15, 50, 100, $200 went that you spent in cash. So keep your receipts and track that as part of your weekly tracking, or track that as part of what you've tracked during the month. Be diligent to know the state of your flocks and attend to your herds. Let me translate that for you. Be diligent to know the state of your finance and attend to your spending. Okay, so the third habit you want to develop is track your spending. All right, guys, wanted to take a quick second to tell you about the Ironmen Mastermind. If you're looking for a band of brothers that you can lock shields with, that can go to battle with you in the day-to-day life, who are also in the trenches going through the same struggles and the same challenges that you are going through, I suggest you check out the Ironmen Mastermind. This mastermind was developed and designed for Christian men to help us become the men that God has created and called us to be. And it's designed to help us increase our relationship with God, increase our relationship with our wives, increase our relationship with our children, and begin to provide better for them financially, spiritually, emotionally, psychologically, relationally, in all of those areas, those things that wake you up in the middle of the night. These are the kinds of things that we work on. These are the kinds of ways that we can help you out in the Ironmen Mastermind. If this is something that is of interest to you, you may want to join the Ironmen community, and you can check out more information at dadhackers.us/Ironmen, one word, Ironmen there. All right, now back to our show. Another proverb is Proverbs 21, verse 20. It says, "The wise store up choice food and olive oil, but fools gulp theirs down." Proverbs 13:22 says, "A good person leaves an inheritance for their children's children." And so the next couple habits are going to deal with saving and laying aside. So the fourth one I have is have a baseline cushion in your checking account, that your checking account will never dip below this number. I recommend that you have $1,000 in your checking account. And I know mines are exploding right now because you're thinking, I don't even have $7 in my bank account. Work to get $1,000 in your checking account. And if you do tips 2 and 3, if you develop habits 2 and 3 where you're budgeting and you're tracking your spending, you're going to get a real slap in the face for how you're actually spending your money. And if you take the cues of how you're actually spending it, you're going to be able to cut back in a lot of areas and save a lot of money. So why do I say have at least $1,000 in your checking account? This is what we would call a mini emergency fund. And you definitely want to communicate with your wife about this, because her cushion may need to be a little bit bigger. Maybe she would feel a little bit more secure with $2,000 in the bank account, or 5 or 10. I don't know. But a lot of people live paycheck to paycheck and have no money in reserve, no money in their checking account, no extra money, nothing laid aside. They gulp everything down every time they get a paycheck. And so what happens? The car needs tires. The hot water tank explodes. Your kid needs braces. You know, you need to go to MedExpress because you got this flu thing going on, and now you're out $150. And you don't have $150. So what do you pull out? You pull out the almighty credit card, and now you're going into debt. And now you're paying interest on that $150 that you spent on that MedExpress visit or that urgent care visit or whatever it is. And now that $150 emergency that you put on credit is going to cost you additional money, additional tax that we would call that, in interest. And so now you're out even more money, and that's added to whatever else you spent last month on your credit card. And it just kind of snowballs from there. And then you get in a very difficult position. So I've been trying to lay these habits out in an orderly progression. The first one we started with was giving. You need to start there. And then Habits 2 and 3 dealt with budgeting and tracking your expenses so that you can know the state of your affairs so that you can really lead financially in your home. Do you have to be the one that actually writes the budget, that actually records the receipts? No. If your wife is the detail person, then support her in that and help her. Make sure if you're the one that's more of a free spirit, you need to be diligent to keep the receipts, to track the spending yourself, to write yourself a note, and to submit it to your wife so that if she's the detail person, she can track it better. So as you begin to do that, it will be a lot easier for you to know the state of your flocks, the state of your affairs. I'm getting the verse worked in there again. And it will be a lot easier for you to get that $1,000 cushion in your checking account. And then once you get that $1,000 cushion in your checking account, you want to begin to establish a larger rainy day fund or emergency fund. And this one you have to be very, very careful with. This is not money that you are laying aside that, when Best Buy has a sale or Amazon goes Black Friday or Cyber Monday or whatever it is, and they got the 72-inch television that's normally $1,200 and they have it for $600, you dip into this fund. That is not what this is for. Or if you want to take your wife out on a date and you want to go to a nice restaurant, that's not what this is for. If your kid wants a new bike, that's not what a rainy day or emergency fund is for. This is for true emergencies. This is for like when you blow out your tires on your car and now you need to spend $500 on tires. This is for when you have your hot water tank explodes and you need to buy a new hot water tank, or your furnace goes and it's the middle of winter. These types of things. Or better yet, you lose your job unexpectedly. You had no clue it was coming. You went into the office on Monday. Monday, 4 o'clock rolls around. Your senior management calls you in and says, sorry, we had to cut your position. This is your last day. Boom, you're out of there. What do you do now? What do you do now? Well, if you have an emergency fund set in place, a rainy day fund, then you're going to have finances set aside that can support you for 3 to 6 months while you're out looking for another job. You're going to have finances set aside so that when the hot water tank explodes, you can replace it that day, pay somebody to do it, and you'll be back up and running in no time, and you didn't have to go into debt. You didn't have to have the extra stress. You didn't have to have that money conversation. You didn't have to have that argument with your wife about it. And you didn't have to snap at your kids because you're totally stressed out because now you're in the whole $700 more on top of everything else. So we need to work toward getting an emergency fund. An emergency fund or a rainy day fund is money set aside that can cover your actual expenses for 3 to 6 months. This goes back again to having a budget and tracking your spending. If you don't have a budget, you have no idea what you need to set aside in order to cover 3 to 6 months worth of expenses. And I stress expenses. I don't say income, because those are two different things. You may bring in a certain amount of money, but once you begin budgeting and tracking your expenses, it's going to be a different amount than what you actually bring in, hopefully. Right now, you might be living paycheck to paycheck and you're spending everything you bring in. But the goal is to spend intentionally not everything that you bring in. And that little bit on the top there that you're not spending, you can begin to set that aside into your emergency fund. And then you can build that. And then once you know what your monthly expenses are, now you have a goal. You have a goal for what is going to be your emergency fund amount. So that's the fifth habit, is develop an emergency fund. The sixth habit is retirement. Are you laying aside money for the future? Proverbs 13:22, again, I'll quote it again, says, a good person leaves an inheritance for their children's children. God has a multi-generational view of finances here. He's leaving an inheritance for his children's children. Of course, we're applying this in a financial context, but as dad hackers, we also want to be thinking about investing eternally with our children and eventually with our grandchildren when that time comes. And so, are you laying aside money for a retirement? A good rule of thumb is to set aside 10 to 15% of your income for retirement. If your company or your organization or your employer offers a retirement match, you should maximize that. If they'll match you up to 5%, put in 5%, because if they match you 5%, now you're at 10%. And boom, you're already there. And that's an easy way to get 100% return on your investment. An easy way to get a raise is to do the employer match. If not, then it's just on you. And again, when you're budgeting and tracking your expenses, you can begin to allocate some money for retirement. Maybe 10% of your income, maybe 15% of your income sounds absolutely nuts to save that much. Well, start with a smaller amount. Start with 1%. Start with 0.5%. Start with $10 a month. Start with something, and then make your goal to work up to, okay, now I'm putting aside $10 a month from my income for savings. My goal is to get to 1%. And then my goal is to get to 2%. And then my goal is to get to 5%. And then my goal is to get to 10%. And then you just build it from there. But you got to start somewhere with saving for retirement. Like I said, even if it's $10 a month, you just got to start somewhere. And then the seventh habit that every man must establish is paying off your debt. I know a lot of people have different ideas about debt and credit cards, and people are worried about their credit score. But the Bible says in Proverbs 22:7 that the rich rules over the poor, and the borrower is slave of the lender. And I'll just give you this extra little tidbit. Why did Christ die on the cross? He died on the cross to pay a debt he did not owe. He died on the cross to pay a debt that we could not pay. He died on the cross to pay the debt for us that was so large that we could not pay it on our own. Point being is that God is all about getting out of debt. Spiritually speaking, yes, but financially speaking, yes as well. Yes and amen. God does not want you to be in bondage to the credit card companies. God does not want you to be in bondage to the mortgage company. But God does not want you to be in bondage to the bank. God wants you out of debt. And I know people are going to yell and scream and say, well, that's going to ruin my credit score, and then I'm not going to be able to do this, that, or the other thing. Guess what? If you can pay cash for your new vehicle, you don't need credit. You don't need credit. Now, those are the seven financial habits that every man must establish: giving, budgeting, tracking your spending, cushion in the bank account, emergency fund, retirement, and paying off debt. Now, I say all this, and let me just put a little disclaimer out there. I am not a financial advisor. I am not a tax expert. I am not an accountant. I am not a lawyer. Any of these things are just wisdom that I've gleaned over the years from personal experience, wisdom that I'm applying from biblical texts. And so you can take this advice if you want, but it's on you to implement it, and how you implement it and the results that you get are completely on you. Okay, so take this advice for what it's worth. It's free to you because you're listening to this video or listening to this podcast. It's free to you. So like I said, take it for what it's worth. Now, I'm in the process of creating a financial checklist that you can look through, and it's going to have just a list of different things that you want to make sure that you have checked off as far as your finances. I'm going to be putting this together and putting it on the Dad Hackers website. And so write this down. It's going to be at dadhackers.us/financial checklist. So it's not up yet as of the recording of this, but by the time you're hearing it, it may be up. So check that out. and register there, and you'll get a free financial checklist that you can look over and see, okay, do I have this? Is this in place? Is this in place for my finances? Oh, I didn't even think about this, so I got to do that. All right, guys, hope that was helpful to you. These 7 financial habits every man must establish. I ask that you please do share this with a couple men that you think need to hear it, and I hope it blesses you guys. All right, brothers, stay sharp. All right, gentlemen, that's all we have for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope our conversation was a blessing to you and that you leave this episode better equipped to be the man and the father God has called and created you to be. If so, then I ask that you please leave us a 5-star rating and a quick written review in iTunes. Then make sure you head on over to the show notes to get all of the resources for this episode. While you're there, you can take part in our 5 Days to Be a Better Dad challenge, as well as get involved with our free Facebook community. All right, gentlemen, until next week, remember Proverbs 27:17. As iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. Stay sharp.